Hello, hello. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. We're going to do a little quick and dirty one today because I'm traveling and I wanted to get something to you, but I also need to honor my time and take care of me. And I wanted to talk about commitment today and how we kind of stay the course when life lifes. So, first thing I want to say is that I personally don't believe that a lot of people are actually afraid of commitment. I know that is a very common thing to hear in the collective, that there are certain people or certain types of people who are who are commitment phobic and they can't commit and all this kind of stuff. And I always look a couple layers deeper, always. And the thing that I have come to the conclusion of, it's not that people are afraid of commitment, because when something is true, we just naturally commit to it. You know, if there's something that really captivates your heart or your mind or your attention, or you are really inspired by it, like it's not so hard to commit to those types of things. And where commitment kind of gets that reputation is at this one particular threshold. And the threshold is when you enter into this terrain of who you will have to become as a result of staying committed. And a lot of people are afraid of becoming who they are here to become. They're not afraid of the commitment. They're afraid of the becoming. And more accurately, it's being afraid of having to grieve past versions of ourselves, having to let go of who we know ourselves to be and step into this more initiatory space where the commitment itself acts as the vehicle for the transformation, and the terrain of the transformation is where you are literally forged. You know, it's you becoming who you are ultimately here to be. And that can be very exciting. It can also be very confronting. Like, we resist becoming the people who we need to become. And it's not that, you know, the necessarily like the relational commitment, let's say, let's use that example. Like, when people don't want to commit, I mean, first of all, there's a lot of different factors that go into a commitment. And this might sound so outrageous, but I find that the people who are a little bit more hesitant to commit are often the ones who actually take commitment more seriously, because they aren't just willing to give it to just anybody. They are really in the space, not everyone, of course, but I do find this to be true, that there is this level of reverence for the commitment that's being made. If it's not aligned, I'm not going to make the commitment. And then people make that mean so much about their own identity and their own worthiness, when really a lot of the time a lack of commitment is really a lack of alignment. And the other person just kind of came to that conclusion first. You know, they might be a little bit more tethered to the full scope of the reality of the connection, or that there are certain areas that are fundamentally misaligned. Now, in the event that the fundamental alignment is there, and let's say the fundamental attraction is there, so you have the core ingredients, right? and someone still doesn't want to commit. We want to watch the impulse to villainize that and take this superior one-up position that we are better, we are more evolved because we can commit. We can see, the value of this thing and they can't, and watch that spot, because that superiority is actually the thing that's interfering with your desire. And people like that will come in and play that out with you so that you can see yourself. And once you can see yourself, you can start to work with those parts and you can start to alchemize what's running underneath them. And then there are the few who resist commitment because of who they will have to become in the process. But that's not everybody, and to paint everyone with the same brush is very dangerous. It's very unrelational, and it's very emotionally immature. It tells me a lot about where the collective consciousness sits. And the collective consciousness sits in a space of adolescence. The collective itself is not in its maturation. It's stuck in this more adolescent place. And adolescents play out a lot of these power dynamics. There's a lot of rebellion. There's a lot of superiority and power over because you feel powerless. And it's just not a mature position. And then there are people who are really called to that maturation path. And it's a path of being initiated. You don't get to a place of emotional and relational maturity by not going through shit. You get to the place of that maturation through the shit, through things not working out the way that you wanted them to, or people not acting the way that you thought that they should, people wanting different things, your heart getting broken. These are all initiatory fires that will forge you. They're literally for you. And so many people don't take the initiation. They stay in this position of being victimized by the reality that they weren't chosen, or that it didn't work out, or it didn't meet their expectations, or the person couldn't commit. And I think that when we step on this path of emotional and relational maturation, it changes our relationship to commitment. Like, I'm personally one of those people who I don't give my commitment to just anyone or anything. I take my commitment seriously because I am someone who will fulfill on it. And that means I am a lot slower to give my commitment if I give it. And when I am rushed or pushed to do that, it really, to me, is a signal of misalignment. And when I'm able to take the space and really vet a connection or a opportunity, and I consider all of the aspects of the commitment. Like, am I actually going to be able to fulfill on this? I like the idea of it, and I might really love a vision or love a creative project or love somebody and not be able to actually fulfill on what it would take to see that to completion, especially if it's a project or a creative endeavor. But also, there have been seasons of my life where I knew that I did not have what it takes to fulfill on a certain type of relationship container. This is why you will hear me talk about the different types of relational containers and why I have approval for all of them. Because different seasons require different things. And those seasons, the resistance wasn't like, I don't want to become the person that this commitment is going to require of me. The resistance was, I am in a phase of my life where my commitment is allocated elsewhere. And that is actually more important to me at this stage than fostering a romantic relationship. I've done that many times where I've been in a season of building or creating or self-exploration, and I'm just not available to a relationship and what it actually would require. And because when I enter relationships, I hold a very high standard. It's very intentional. We're not just flying by the seat of our pants. Like, it is a intentional container that is being constructed, and that requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot of communication. It requires just a different level of presence, that if I am in a season of my life where I don't actually have that available, it is completely irresponsible of me to enter into a relationship or into a commitment that I know that I will not be able to fulfill on. But so many people are either starved for love and connection, or they don't want to be the bad guy, that they will get wrangled into things, and it becomes true. Like, you don't actually have the capacity. Your priorities are elsewhere. And something that I see so often is this villainization of people who have different priorities, as though they are somehow dysfunctional, they are wrong, they are bad. It's this villainization, it's this superiority complex, it's a domination pattern. It's a humiliation pattern too, because oftentimes people will take to social media to publicly humiliate someone and call them out. And it's just really immature. It's this adolescent consciousness that's running. When, if we really distill it down, someone who deeply respects relationships isn't just going to jump into one just for the sake of being in one or not being alone. Someone who really respects relationships is going to consider, is this aligned? Do I have the current capacity to hold what this relationship will require of me? Is there fundamental attraction there? And am I willing to become the person that this commitment will call forward in me? Am I willing to become the person who holds this standard or this type of relationship? And it's okay if you're in a season where the answer is no. And it's really important that you learn how to back that you learn to have approval for it, so that the energetics aren't wonky and you don't get stuck in this undertow of like defending yourself, or finding someone else to make wrong, or you play this ping pong game of shame and blame and make wrong and judgment with the other side that's judging you. It's just not a good use of anyone's creative energy. And so when we really are in a conversation about commitment, it does require a little bit more fleshing out than a lot of people do. Like, a lot of people just jump into things, whether they're relationships, whether they're projects, and they don't really consider the long-term scope of that and what it's actually going to require. And when you are moving in a much more intentional way, you do consider that. And you are willing to disappoint someone to stay true to your integrity, to stay true to your capacity, And of course, there are seasons where it's important to expand your capacity, and it's important to lean in and to, step into the ring of becoming the person who, the commitment is going to essentially forge you to be. But you have free will, and no one can tell you when that season is and when it's right for you. And only you get to decide. And the thing that I've come to realize is that the timing is always right. Even though our egos might think differently, or our protector parts, sometimes we're just really influenced by the culture at large, or these energetics that kind of play out. We don't want to get left behind. Our fears kind of get in the way. And that's all part of the process. It's all part of the becoming. That's all part of figuring yourself out. It's all a part of actually becoming more available to love. And I want you to really watch this spot where you might villainize someone else in their relationship to commitment. And instead of getting stuck in that superiority, domination energetic, use it as a mirror. What is it reflecting about your relationship to commitment? Where in your life are you really committed? Where is your commitment lacking? That if you were to make a change in that area, it would transform who you know yourself to be and your relationship to your entire life. And so when we start to use life as kind of a mirror school, it becomes this very deep and rich and connected experience. We get a hold of the actual pulse and pace of our life. We're not living someone else's dream through our body, but instead we're connected. We're connected in our body. We're connected in our heart. We're connected in our genitals. We're connected in our mind. We're connected in our soul. And that alignment is doing the creation. It's the thing that is saying yes and committing. And when we really take our commitment seriously, we actually set proper containment. People who don't take relationships seriously, they don't take commitment seriously, are also the same ones who really struggle with containment and having clarity around the containment. And I think a lot of the times they just don't realize that they actually get to be the conscious creator of that. It's not this thing that's being done to them. It's a thing that they co-create based on their needs, the other person's needs, the needs of the actual relationship. And it becomes this creative project between two people. My business partner and I, we renegotiate our agreements whenever it feels true to. We just went through a season of this. And when it starts to get crunchy, we renegotiate. We reset the containment. We look at, okay, what needs to shift, what needs to change, what needs to be added, what needs to be subtracted. And it's what keeps our friendship really vital and healthy, and also our partnership. Even though there are seasons where it might feel a little off, or it might feel a little distant or a little wobbly, we have this commitment to each other. And in doing so, it always kind of weaves us back at the right time to have those conversations and recreate the containment. And containment is really important because it sets the expectations. You're never going to get rid of expectations. They are there, and they are a part of human relating. All of these, spiritual teachings and personal development teachings that tell you you shouldn't have any expectations, and neither should they. It's an incomplete teaching. because expectations, you're not getting rid of them. And expectations don't actually ruin relationships. The uncommunicated expectations do. So if you bring the expectation out in the open and you share it, the other person does the same, and then you create agreements around that. And you can see what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, what's within range, what's not within range, what feels true, what doesn't feel true. And you have higher level conversations that are very much creative conversations. You create the relationship alive. You cannot have an alive relationship without containment. Like, think of a body of water, like a river. If a river doesn't have containment, the water doesn't flow. The flow actually requires containment. And without that containment, the water gets stagnant and becomes toxic. And a lot of people, again, who are operating from this adolescent consciousness, see containment as a restriction to their freedom, not realizing that the equation to true freedom lives in the commitments that you make and the containment around those commitments. And the freedom exists in your ability to actually create that intentionally, to know yourself so intimately that you can have a conversation about your needs. You can have a conversation about what it is that you desire. You do have a clear vision, and you are willing to create agreements and containment, whether it's a creative project, a romantic relationship, a friendship, a business dynamic, doesn't matter. It's the same equation across the board. And the more that we invest into that, the cleaner our relational containers become, the cleaner our channel becomes, the more flow we actually experience, the more connection and intimacy we actually experience, because there's actual flow and connectivity, and people know where the boundaries are. They know where the banks of the river are. They know what game they're playing. And when you don't know what game you're playing, no one's ever going to win. And really, like in relationships, you want to set your team up for a winning game. Your partner is your teammate. And if we don't have a game plan, we don't even know what game we're playing, how are we ever going to win together? Well, you won't. And really, like, I don't really see the point of living or relating or creating if we're not creating in an intentional way, if we're not getting the most out of life that we possibly could, and we don't create the most opportunity for love and connection and intimacy that we can. And so that does require an emotional and relational maturing. It does require us to take commitment seriously and get really clear on what is a yes for us and what is a no. And then being able to create containment and really have those honest conversations about agreements and needs and form, so that there is this mental freedom. Like, the brain literally relaxes the second it has that containment, and that's when you can really play. That's when you can really create magic, is when both people know exactly what it is and exactly what it's not, and what you're agreeing to, what game you're playing. And there's so much freedom inside of that. And if you come across someone who is really not on board with that, you just got to clock that as, okay, we're on different trajectories. We have probably different missions, with our work, with our medicine, with what we want to contribute to the world. We might be playing very different games relationally, because on the conventional path, that is a very conventional belief. It's this adolescent belief of, resisting agreements, containment, because the association is a loss of freedom. And then if you actually deconstruct any of those people's lives, like that freedom that they're chasing always creates chaos. And so that they're trying to outrun chaos, they're trying to outrun, expectations and disappointment, and shame is really what it comes down to. They aren't in right relationship with who they are, and shame is a thing that just takes them out again and again and again and again. And you can't alchemize someone else's shame. You can only alchemize your own. And that is obviously a big focus of the work that I do. And we do that through the axis of approval. And if you've never had an experience of approval, you actually need to have the experiential transmission of that in a relational container. And that is what happens whether we work one-on-one or whether we are in a group container. That is inevitable, that there is going to be that transmission and embodiment and experience of what it's like to be met with approval, so that your system receives the map that it never got. And once it receives that map enough times, then you start replicating that within your relationship to yourself, and how you relate to yourself and how you relate to other people. And over time, that approval grows to a point where it's stronger than the shame. We're not here to dominate the shame and try and force it out. That's not what alchemy is all about. Alchemy is a transformative process where we take the shame and we transform it into power. And that there's so many aspects to that. But when you're dealing with someone who really has that squirrely relationship to commitment, and they don't want to create containment, and they have this story about it restricts their freedom, just understand that that is someone who is operating through life with a lot of shame. And to be in a relationship with that is, the transfer of shame is going to come onto you. Not exactly a good time. Versus letting people be where they are and letting them stay where they want to stay. Letting them operate how they want to operate, and let them kind of chase that freedom, and let them, avoid containment and creating form. It's so annoying. I promise I'm not Mel Robbins, but you gotta let them, and then go in the direction and let them and leave them where they're at. This is not about dragging someone to a different level of consciousness that they aren't choosing. That isn't love. That isn't you being embodied in consciousness either. The embodiment of consciousness and self-worth and power resides in, okay, this person is where they are. That is not congruent for me and the type of relationships that I want to create. This makes it a non-starter. This makes it a no. And I'm going to let them be on their journey, and I'm going to go on mine, and I'm going to move towards people who have a congruent relationship with commitment, with containment, with agreements, with freedom and intimacy and self-intimacy and intimacy with others, and go in that direction, because that's actually what I'm committed to. And so you get to see how complex and nuanced all of this is, because if you're actually committed to the type of relationship you say that you're committed to, You are not going to spend time dragging the people who are not committed to that same thing through the mud and trying to force them to be what you need them to be. Instead, you allow them to be where they're at. You accept it. You feel the feelings around it. You feel the disappointment. You feel the rejection. You feel the pain and the heartbreak and the loss. And then you keep moving. You stay the course. You stay connected. You stay in alignment with acting congruently with the thing that you desire. So, I'm going to leave that there for you today to digest. If you're listening on Spotify, leave me a comment. Let me know how that all lands and what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And if you made it this far and you're digging these types of conversations, please do leave me a 5-star review. If you are listening on Apple, I would love a review on there, and that really helps the podcast find who it needs to find. If you're listening on YouTube, you can leave a comment as well. And I will be back next week with something new. And if you are feeling the pull to come into my world and do this deeper work of following those threads of desire and living congruently with that and staying committed to what you're actually committed to and what your vision and what your desire is, I would highly recommend exploring the one-to-one container. And if that is out of range financially, then please do come into the group container, because we still do that work there. We just do it in a slightly different way, but it's always the same through line. And I love you all. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And I look forward to connecting with you next week.